The coach smelled of leather, hot iron, and the faint sweetness of freighted apples, and Tamsin Rain kept both hands easy on the reins as Dawn lifted the lid off the desert. Her name on the line ledger was T. Rain, 3 neat strokes, because nobody asked questions of a letter. Nobody looked hard at a brim pulled low and a kerchief knotted quiet as a prayer. The horses knew her steadiness better than most men did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The stage shuddered over washboard ruts south of Calico Mesa. Tamsin listened, always listening, to the rhythm of wheel and trace chain, to the coughs of the 2 passengers inside, to the brush scratch of greasewood against the coach box. Listening too to her own breathing, finding the cadence that kept her hands patient and her eyes clear. A good driver learns sound long before speed. Sound told truth first. She'd left the relay at Spanish Tank an hour before sunup, swapping teams with Ezra Pike, who joked, as he always did, that the line was mighty lucky to have the fastest hands west of the divide. Ezra's grin had a way of looking past her face to the space where a story might live. Tamsin offered him the same small smile she gave everyone, a promise she'd bring the coach in clean, and rolled out under a sky the color of cold iron. She'd repainted the coach badge herself 2 months back, Hammer and Son stage line. The original gilt had been chipped and mean, like a smile full of tobacco voids. New paint steadied her, like polishing a detail nobody else would ever notice. The world called that fussy. Tamsin called it survival. The passengers were a pair you wouldn't set for long in your mind if you didn't need to. Mr. Blunt, a traveling auctioneer who carried his weight like an apology, and Miss Alma Finch, who wore pale gloves that made her hands look fragile as moth wings. Miss Finch spoke softly to the window, telling the dawn what color it was becoming. Mr. Blunt slept between jangles of waking, mumbling bids to ghosts. Tamsin catalogued what mattered, a whisper of circling buzzards to the east, meaning either carrion or men who'd soon make it. A single rider on the far ridge, moving with the checker's patience. A ribbon of dust on the Johnson cutoff that didn't belong to wind. She didn't move different for any of it. She simply breathed, counted hoofbeats, and kept an eye on the little mirrors she'd mounted to catch the faces of the team so she could see fear before it galloped. At the north end of Dry Harrow Wash, the grade tipped. The coach took the pitch like a held breath, front wheels biting first, then the box settling. She kissed the brake with the ease of a pianist and felt the whole rig answer. Only then did she let the worry in. Someone had nailed a fresh sign to the marker post. Someone had come out here at night to change the world by one small wooden truth. Detour, Johnson cutoff, flood damage ahead. There'd been no rain. Tamsin tasted the air. No silt ghosted on the wind the way flood left behind. No water scent in the sage. She held the team steady and let the coach roll to a stop. Left the brake set. "Everything all right, driver?" Mr. Blunt's voice bobbed through the leather curtain like a buoy on chop. "Road crew moved the sign," she said. If she pitched her voice a little lower, no one asked questions. She had learned that early, along with the difference between a man's shadow and his silhouette. "Bless their hearts," Miss Finch said. "I have a terrible history with detours." Tamsin climbed down without hurry. Haste was a bell that rang men from brush. She checked the harness buckles, the trace hooks, the feed of lines through each Tourette's ring. She looked at the sign like it was a bird she didn't want to startle. The nailheads were bright, hammered at night. She scanned the flats. The single rider on the ridge had gone to ground. She let herself remember an old lesson: don't step where the story sets you, set your own place instead, and turn the team straight for the flooded wash. Inside the coach, the auctioneer groaned. "Driver, we're not taking the cutoff." "No." She did not explain that a detour in a country with no rain was a man's whisper telling you where to die.
They hit the wash at a walk, wheels whispering over powdered dirt. The banks crouched on either side like shoulders, good ambush ground. She kept the leaders square and pretended to study their ears so she could use the mirror. In the mirror, a faint quiver in the off-leader's cheek, something alive in the brush to the right, breathing wrong. Tamsin laid the whip over the team with a stroke like a blessing, not to hurry, but to speak. They answered with a lift, a brave little gathering of themselves that made her throat warm. The shot when it came was far off, a tester, meant to spook. It pinged a rock on the left bank and died. "Merciful heavens!" Miss Finch said. Her gloved fingers appeared under the curtain edge, clutching the seat rail like a child's. Tamsin didn't look back. "Keep low." The words were simple as water. A coyote loped from the brush and vanished. 2 more tester shots. Men like to feel big before they became small. She let them. The wash narrowed to a throat. She breathed through it. The throat opened to a flat where the wind cut clean and honest. No riders showed themselves. They'd let her pass then, which meant they wanted something downstream. She got the coach across and put the horses into an easy lope on the far grade, then took a line no one would expect, a left arc into poorer ground, because poor ground was noisier, and noise talks like a friend when you need a witness. The team's shoes struck stone now and again, sparks in daylight. On the high shelf before Dead Horse Bend, she saw them, 3 riders, waiting lazy as cats in a sun-bleached arroyo. Their hats had new creases, their coats the color of borrowed dust. Flagmen, meant to wave her in. She looked not at them but at the places they weren't sitting. The shadow to the right shaped like a 4th man, the frayed tumbleweed on the left with a saddle's ghost, beneath. 5 then, maybe 6. The single rider from the ridge was nowhere, which meant everywhere. "Morning!" she called, not slowing. She tipped the brim of her hat in a way that made most men tilt their chin to catch the respect, just enough to lengthen a draw stroke. "What's your name, driver?" the center man said, raising a hand in a friendly lie. "Flood took the wash. Cut-off's the safe way. Town put down a new sign." "Lucky town, unlucky wash." He laughed and waved her toward the gap between them. It was the kind of wave you used on a skittish dog. Tamsin ran her tongue along her teeth, feeling the history of quiet fights she'd won and lost. She shifted the brake lever a notch and pressed her boot, left foot only, against the hidden bar under the box that would bleed the rear wheels if she needed to pivot hard. Ezra had built it. She'd paid him in silence and a promise. "What's your name, driver?" the man asked, almost friendly still. "We like to know who we're helping." "T.R. Rain," she said. The letter landed in the dust between them and didn't tell any tales. "Much obliged, Mr. Rain." He leaned and spat into the shade. "We'll see you through safely." His right hand twitched toward his thigh the way a man's hand twitches when it knows a pistol but thinks it's still a hand. The shade to the right breathed once, in, as if surprised to find itself alive. The tumbleweed to the left acquired a boot heel. Tamsin smiled like a tired man at a long day. "Appreciate it." Then she did a thing that would later be told wrong in at least 9 saloons. She stood up on the box and put both arms out like a woman measuring a bolt of cloth. The team felt her go tall and took their cue not from fear, but from theater. They lifted. The coach surged. She took the gap as if she believed in it with her whole body, which for a breath made it real. The men reached together for the space where their surprise lived. Hands dove, guns blinked in sunlight. Tamsin dropped, the brake bar kicking hard under her boot. The coach skated, rear wheels sighing, dust lifting like a curtain. Her right hand lived on the reins. Her left, that was the secret, found the slit in the box rail where a flat-cocked colt rode asleep under canvas. She didn't pull it free. She just let its weight touch her like a promise. 3 shots, 2 high, 1 mean and true. It chewed a notch the length of a fingernail out of the coach's front corner and spanged into the iron tire. The team took the noise into their chests and ran forward, which is where courage lives if you've practiced it. "Down!" Tamsin barked, and heard the passengers obey, the deep, surprised thud of a man's knees, the dry whisper of skirts.
The fourth man came alive out of the arroyo's shadow, with a lariat raised, mean as a fence. He threw for her shoulders. The loop found the air where she'd been and kissed it. Tamsin bowed, letting the rope write its own failure in the dust. The fifth man stood up out of the tumbleweed with burrs glued to his sleeves and a pistol that wanted to mean something. He had the same problem as most pistols. It couldn't be faster than a thought that had learned to be quiet. Tamsin thought nothing. She let her body be all the answers. The coat slid into her left palm and spoke once, flat and narrow, and the man's pistol was a gaume thing rattling in brush while his hand learned about heat. The team surged clean through the gap. The rope scraped off the rear boot and vanished. For a beat, the road ahead was only road again. Then the ridge to the north tipped its hat and sent her a fresh problem. 4 more riders trotting down in diamond, businesslike, a wedgeman to pinch her against Dead Horse Bend. One had a flour sack knotted to his saddle horn. Sacks didn't need guns. They needed a driver who would stop because a sack meant somebody's life. Tamsin tasted tin in her mouth. She felt for the brake with her boot, then took it away. Brakes were for fear. She set her feet wide on the box rail and slipped the colt back under its canvas, the way a gambler hides a card to prove he doesn't need it. "Driver?" Mr. Blunt again, voice brittle. "Do we parley?" "Not with men who write detours without rain." She kissed to the team, a sound she'd made since childhood when sound kept secrets. The leaders flicked their ears and squared their chests. It was the square that saved you. Square horses made square choices. The diamond of riders fanned, making themselves big, letting her see the sack. Miss Finch's gloved hand crept under the curtain again and found the hem of Tamsin's duster like a spar in weather. Tamsin felt the tug and did not shake it off. She let the small human weight be a tether between what was right to do and what it would cost. "Mornin', friend," the lead rider called. His voice had the easy charmer's varnish of a man who'd loan his smile for usury. "We'll trouble you only a minute." Tamsin said nothing. Empty was a language, too. "You're hauling a tidy lot of banknotes and mine assays in that black strongbox behind your seat. Our employer wants them back. Seems they were taken without consent." "Employer," she said. It was the only word she gave him, and she gave it with a dryness that could sand a board smooth. "Blackburn," he said, and he loved the way the name sounded in air. "Maybe you've heard of him." She had. Everyone south of the rail had. Blackburn ran 3 towns without owning 1 law badge. He liked to call it stewardship. He let boys with bad fathers be worse. "Rein up," the lead rider said. And his horse was a good one, the kind that resented being used for lies. Tamsin watched the sack. It moved as sacks moved when you had a child inside. Not wriggling, slow, careful. She turned the coach slightly so she could see the sack without letting the sun glare her blind. The knot had been tied by someone who knew rope better than sense. Bowline, neat, kind to a neck. "What's in the sack?" she said, and she made the words dull as if she had no blood to warm them. "Insurance," he said cheerfully. She exhaled once through her nose and let the air leave with whatever softness had been in her. "Alma," she said, without looking back, and Miss Finch started at the use of her name. "Can you hold tight to Mr. Blunt's arm?" "I can," Miss Finch said, and the moth gloves became hawk claws. "Mr. Blunt, put your right shoulder against the left wall when I say." "Say what?" he blinked. "You'll know." The lead rider saw the small motion of Tamsin's head as she spoke and flashed a smile that wasn't for her benefit. It was to tell his men he controlled all of this. "Don't try clever. Clever gets people dead, and we're gentlemen." The sack moved again, the careful way a child moves when she's been told by a whisper not to cry. Tamsin raised the reins shoulder high. not showy, not fast, and the team checked without losing heart. She moved the brake with her boot a hair width, not enough to mark, enough to teach the rear wheels to listen. The world pinched around Dead Horse Bend. To the right, a fall into a boulder orchard. To the left, a wall stacked by God who liked puzzles. Straight ahead, 4 men and a sack she couldn't abide.
She said the only prayer she said anymore. It had no words. It was a picture of a creek in spring with cottonwood fuzz riding the water. In that picture, a girl stood on a bank with a whip in her hand and learned that horses loved you if you let them. "Now," she said. Mr. Blunt threw his shoulder as ordered. Ms. Finch braced him with a small sound that was not a scream because she refused to give fear that word. Tamsin rolled the coach left until the axle shrieked a warning, then cut it hard right on a pivot the team had practiced in alfalfa fields, where failure meant only dust and laughter. The coach carved a crescent and showed its iron spine to the riders. The lead man swore, a short, almost admiring word, then spurred to block. Tamsin's left hand did not pull the colt. It found another lever she'd bolted under the seat 3 winters ago. A scatter of filings packed in beeswax over the high step. She stomped it. The filings spilled like a small starfield under the rear wheels. Iron bit iron with a scream. Sparks jumped like thrown coins. The coach hopped sideways, just a handspan, but in the language of physics, a handspan can be a paragraph. The sack slid off the horn. The rider grabbed. He caught rope, not sack. The bag hit the ground with a sound that turned Tamsin's stomach into a fist. It rolled once, twice, and stopped against a stone. The knot faced her like an eye. She was off the box before a thought could correct her. The reins ran in a wash of leather through her right hand as she hit the dirt. The team kept their square, God bless square, and held the line as if she were still on the box, because faith is a thing animals do better than men. "Driver!" Mr. Blunt cried. Ms. Finch said something small and savage that made Tamsin like her better. The lead rider fired, then cursed because he'd aimed where she'd been. She didn't duck, she went low instead, which is different. Ducking is fear, going low is geometry. She cut the bowline with her pocket knife and peeled the sack back like she was unwrapping bread. A girl stared up with eyes the color of the washed sky. 10, maybe. Cord at her wrists, cord at her ankles, a wad of cloth in her mouth, tied so as not to cut. She had the quiet look children get when they're busy not crying. She dragged her behind the high rear wheel and put the girl's hands on the iron. "Feel this. It is a thing that will not lie to you." She sliced the gag free. "Breathe." The girl breathed. "Muz," she tried. "Later," Tamsin said, and that was the promise, not the refusal. Gunfire stitched the air into hard pieces. The team snorted and braced. 2 riders came in from the flanks, impatient men who'd been taught that speed and hurry are the same thing. Tamsin lifted the colt then, not because legend asked her to, but because arithmetic did. Left hand, short pull, don't let your shoulder help. Shoulders are honest. Honesty gets you killed. One round took a spur from a boot and the sense from its owner. The other put daylight through a hat brim and religion into the mind under it. They wavered, and in that wobble the world widened enough for a choice to walk through. "Back to the box," Tamsin told herself, but the girl's fingers locked on her sleeve with a strength that belonged to a different kind of math. The lead rider smiled again, and this time the smile belonged to Blackburn, not a man. It was the smile of a death that wanted to live in your house. "Fast, aren't you?" he said. "Faster than your reputation, Mr. Rain. Faster than sense." He lifted 2 fingers. The single rider from the ridge, quiet as a cough in a funeral, appeared on the high shelf above Dead Horse Bend, muzzle like a bead on a rosary. He had the posture of an old schoolmaster about to rap knuckles. He was far enough that only a fool would answer with a pistol, and far enough that a careful shot could draw a map on a body if he wanted to. "Set the gun down," the lead rider said pleasantly, "or the child learns a lesson about consequences." Tamsin kept her eyes on the child and spoke to the air, because the air was where men stored their confidence. "You let a man on a shelf hold your nerve." Thought Blackburn hired leaders, not stairs. The shelf man did not smile. He didn't need to.
He was the part of the plan no one bragged about at the table, but everyone touched with their boot under the chair. Tamsin placed the colt on the dirt. She said it butt first, muzzle away, the way you said a thing you mean to need again. She lifted both hands. Dust stuck to her palms and made maps of old scars, rope burn, a bite from a green colt, a line along her left thumb like a tiny horizon. "Step away," the lead rider said. "Leave the child." "No," Tamsin said, and the word was so soft that it seemed to land first in the girl's ear and only later in the men's. "What did you say?" The varnish on his voice cracked. "She rides with me," Tamsin said. "You want the box? Take the box, but she rides with me." The rider laughed in the way men laugh when they've just remembered they don't have to understand to win. "You don't set terms, Mr. Rain. You're a driver. You drive where we point." Tamsin stood. Dust lifted off her hat brim and made a ring that caught the sun. She felt the team behind her, a living wall, and the coach at her back, a red rib cage that had learned to be a heart. She felt Ms. Finch's breath inside the coach like a sail filling. She felt Mr. Blunt's fear and his readiness to spend it if someone told him how. She looked up at the shelf. Sun shined along the long barrel and made a thin, bright blade. Wind licked the man's coat and little tongues. "On my count," she said, not loud, but into the bones of the world, because bones listen. 1. "Don't be," the lead rider started. 2, and the team tightened their backs like a bow's first inch. "Driver, if you move, I'll—" the shelf man called, but he did not like that his voice had to cross so much air to reach her. 3, and she moved, not forward or back, but with the desert's own grammar. Sideways into shadow, hand sweeping the child with her, boot finding the lip of the hub, knee finding the rail, weight finding the box step as the coach came alive under her like a friend lifting you from a ditch. The colt was empty air where her palm had just been. The shelf man's rifle cracked, clean and final as a judge's gavel. The iron of the step bracket with a ringing shriek, sparking a sunflower of light that burned and died in a blink. The force knocked the bracket loose from its second rivet. The coach lurched, the girl cried out, and Tamsin's shoulder took the blow meant for quiet things. Bone thrumming from socket to collar, like someone had struck a bell inside her. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. She didn't let go. Her palm found the girl's ribs and the rail in the same motion, knuckles white, breath sawed short. The team felt the shot in their hindquarters and surged. The lead rider swore, spurs raking his good horse's sides into a lunge that had no plan in it. Mr. Blunt shouted her name, and then clapped a hand over his mouth as if he'd said a secret he had no right to know. Miss Finch braced both feet on the coach floor and pressed her back into the wall exactly as instructed, a human keel. "Up," Tamsin told the girl, not with panic, but with the kind of firmness bridges use to convince rivers to split. "Knees, then seat. Don't look back." The child obeyed. Children who've been bound come to understand that the first order someone gives without cruelty is a road. The shelf man worked his bolt with the indifferent neatness of a bookkeeper. He ran the rifle like he had an abacus somewhere in his mind and a tally he meant to keep. He acquired them again as the coach cleared the worst of the boulder orchard, muzzle lifting a thumb's width to account for the sway, wind, pride. He had missed once by an inch because he had measured a driver and found a man. The second time he meant to measure a woman and find math. Tamsin felt him thinking. Some men poured thought into the world like oil and cut the team right so the wheel that had lost a rivet would carry less sorrow. She slid onto the box, the girl a tight knot at her hip, and gathered the reins with her good shoulder. The hurt one burned like a brand and made her teeth ache. "Driver," the lead rider called, mock cordial shredded to rope. "Stop the team or I'll have my top man punch daylight through that child." "Your top man missed a step," Tamsin said softly, not bothering to throw the words up to the shelf. She let the wind carry them.
Wind has a gossip's appetite and a priest's confidence. She popped the brake once to set the rig, then let it loose. The coach fishtailed the span, corrected itself, then stretched into the long running the flats begged for. The shelf man's bullet struck a plank behind the seat and spit splinters like sown oats. The girl flinched, but she didn't scream. She breathed how Tamsin breathed, in on the count of what the horses needed, out on the count of the road. "Name," Tamsin asked her, as if they were in a church vestibule and someone had just asked to be remembered. "Lark," the girl said, and it fit because she was all bone music and small, fierce heart. "Hold the rail, Lark," Tamsin said. "Left hand only. Put your right here." She slid the child's palm under the seat, where her own felt the notch of the Colt Esri had hidden on a bet she'd never needed. The metal was cool, oily, patient. "You don't touch it unless I say, but if I say, you don't think. You lift and pass." "Yes, ma'am," Lark whispered. "Blunt," Tamsin called through the curtain. "Count to 20 and then throw the strong box out the back door. On the right, hard." Throw? He gagged on the notion. "The bank will have my hide. The line will—" "The bank can buy a new hide. You can't buy a life." Miss Finch's voice slid in like a thread through a button. "He'll do it. He's shaking, but he will." The lead rider was coming. Diamond men fanned again, but their pride had been stepped on twice, and pride limps. The shelf man worked a third shot. This one was for the horses. Tamsin felt the wind shift and twisted in the seat to put her own body between the muzzle's idea and the right wheeler's shoulder. The round bit her hat brim, ripped felt, punched the backboard, and buried itself in somebody else's story. 10, Mr. Blunt moaned. 11. The lead rider had recovered enough charm to be dangerous again. "No one wants your blood. Blackburn's a businessman. The papers, the notes, give them and go. Keep the child. We'll take the money, and my men won't earn extra." 15, Blunt quavered. Lark stared at the shelf with a look Tamsin recognized from salt flats in drought. Wide, exact, unforgiving. "He's not your top man," the girl said. "He's a weight. The good ones don't need a hill to stand on." 17, Blunt managed.
Tamsin smiled without teeth. "You'll be a driver," she said. 19, Blunt squeaked, and the door banged open. The strong box skidded out with less grace than a pig on ice, tumbled twice and fetched up amid a spray of filings and grit. Every eye went to it, even the shelf man's. In that common greed, Tamsin saw the old mercy of the world, how appetite made blind holes in skill. "Now," she breathed, and kicked the crude lever that Ezra had taught the rear axle to respect only when she sang to it under her breath. The coach hopped again, the injured bracket groaning, and the rear door slammed itself shut like a righteous mouth. The strong box went on scudding, a clumsy comet. The diamond broke, men bringing horses around with curses and the kind of hand that bruises a mouth. The lead rider cut across to head the box, and, in doing, turned his horse through the path of the shelf man's line of fire. The rifle cracked. The lead rider's hat jumped. The horse crow-hopped, eyes rolling insulted. The round screamed into the dirt 2 yards ahead of the box and stitched up a chain of pebbles that rang like bells. "Damn you, Garrett!" the lead man shouted toward the rim. "You blind son of—" The shelf man, Garrett then, didn't answer, which felt like his kind of answer. 2 of the diamond peeled right after the box, the 3rd cut left to parallel the coach, the 4th hung back to watch how the world decided. Blackburn would have men behind these men. He liked to stage consequence in acts. "Hold, Lark," Tamsin said again, and put the team straight into the teeth of Dead Horse Ben's last kink. He'd run it smoother 100 times than she did now, but she'd never run it with a small hand tucked under her seat and a rifle writing its neat sums overhead. The off-leader balked at a white rock shaped like a sheep. She whispered a comfort meant for horses and old men and babies. He believed her. They cleared the kink. Brush opened. The flats ran out like a ribbon you could write a letter on. South, Spanish tank relay. A low-shouldered adobe with corral stitched to it by wire. West, the long tongue of road toward Windless Bluff and the coal camp where men found new ways to cough. North, a smudge that was town if you were the sort who called 2 streets and a church a town. East, the gulch, where water remembered old arguments and then forgot them. Tank, Tamsin trolled the team. They knew the word like they knew whoa. Their ears pricked. Horses love a trough more than any speech God ever sent man. Behind, the 2 men who chased the box had made themselves into gamblers and the box into a pot. They jostled and snapped at one another, rein slapping, hooves carving punctuation into dust. One snatched at the handle and missed. The other laughed in a way that promised cruelty at supper. The cautious 4th rider paced the coach, pistol loose at his thigh, eyes never leaving Tamsin's hands. Garrett did the arithmetic again and settled the bead not on horse, not on child, not on driver, but on the injured bracket. He wasn't cruel, he was economical. He put his bullet where it would turn skill into clutter. The shot struck the wounded iron. The rivet that had held despite heat and wind remembered that it was tired and left this world. The bracket spit itself outward. The step dropped and began to dance like a sailor in a storm. The whole coach went loose on its right rear corner, a wheel pretending it belonged to a different family. Tamsin felt the change as a seam in the road that wasn't there, a new tilt, a new argument. She leaned into it, persuaded with her calves, and the team bent as one, body a question with one answer. The box lurched. Miss Finch put her palm flatter to the wall and pressed Mr. Blunt with a hiss that sounded like the wheels. Hold, Tamsin told everything. Boats, horses, prayers.
Driver, the cautious rider called. Let it be. We'll take the box and you take the wreck. My word on it. Your word is smoke, Tamsin said, and hauled left, putting the coach onto the strip of road that still held its packed crown. She could feel the axle threatening to share secrets it had no right to. She eased. Easing is not the same as giving up. It's how iron and bone make friends. The flats crowded with riders. The 2 who had fought over the box now fought over who had the right to hand it to Blackburn and collect a man's gratitude you could only ever spend once. The lead rider wove between them, furious at math and men. Garrett fired again and missed because the world had added a gust to an equation that had not asked for one. Spanish tank lay ahead, low and honest, smoke curling from a stovepipe, a mule cussing in a voice like a Bible page torn in half. Ezra Pike stood on the porch with a mug of coffee and a rifle he cleaned every morning because he liked how clean things sounded when they worked. He lifted the mug, saw the tandem of dust and danger, and put the mug down so careful he could have been setting a baby in a cradle. "Open the corrals!" Thompson shouted when she was close enough to spend breath on noise. "Gate 1 and 2, then stand away from the latch." Ezra didn't ask why. Men who have learned the joke of living don't ask why while the punchline is still running. He moved, long strides, rifle across his back so he had hands free. The corral gates banged back on their hinges like men happy at a dance. "Blunt," Tamsin called. "When we cross the first post, you take Miss Finch's hand and jump. Don't think. Roll. Get to the water trough and put yourselves under it." "What about—" "Do it." The cautious rider on her left paced her like a judge, eyes on the box, thinking he could time a leap and land a hand on iron and write himself a promotion. His horse, a fine sorrel with a blaze that looked like a child had painted it with a wet finger, blew and flattened its ears in a way that said it would like to appeal the decision. "Don't," Tamsin told him, without looking. "Your horse has better sense than you." He flinched because truth does what bullets only pretend to do. They hit the first gate at a gallop and threaded the coach straight into Corral 1.
The team, reading the space like a letter they had been born to, shied to the inner fence where the ground was packed and the world felt framed. Thompson stood on the box, set the brake hard with her good foot, and hauled the rig into a slide that sucked time long. For a breath it felt like the ship was a ship, and she a captain who had decided to trust the sea. "Now!" she yelled. Mr. Blunt jumped as if the word had been a hand under his spine. Miss Finch jumped with him, tidy as if she were alighting from a carriage onto a ladies' block in a city square. They hit dirt, rolled, and then crawled for the trough like sensible creatures who knew that air was sometimes less useful than water. Thompson swung the team around the inner post and then drove them straight through the second gate into Corral 2. Ezra, staggering just clear, hooked the first gate with a hay hook and yanked it closed so that it would seem to men watching that the logic of the world had done it. The cautious rider tried to follow and found a gate in his mouth like a lesson. The team came to, the coach rocked onto its wounded wheel and then miraculously found 4 again. Thompson's vision went gray at the edges the way a lamp chimney fogs when breath hits cold glass. She talked the gray down. "Stand, children," she told the horses, which is what they were to her, all of them, no matter their size. "Stand. Good. Good." The yard outside the corrals filled with riders and arguments. The lead man hauled his horse around for a stand against the fence. His face had the look men get when they realize that plans are just stories we tell the morning to make the noon less lonely. Ezra Pike slid under the top rail and handed Thompson up a coil of green rawhide as if it were a bouquet. She paid him in a look that meant more than coins. "Brackets out," he said. "Wheel'll go if we run her hard." "I don't need hard. I need clever." She jerked her chin at the far corner of Corral 2, where the fence ran close to the adobe wall. "We'll wedge it and make a false block, hold just enough to get to town." "You thinking of bringing Blackburn's men to town?" Ezra asked, not because he objected, but because he wanted the shape of her thought. "I'm thinking of bringing the law to them," Thompson said, "such as law is." Ezra lifted a brow. "Hollis? Or someone who can borrow his badge for an hour." They worked without speaking after that, because doing is a language better than any talk men have built to fence it. Ezra braced the wheel with a kiss of lumber. Thompson wrapped rawhide in a crisscross that would hold if nobody asked it to dance. Lark watched with the fierce focus of a person who has learned that knowing how something is put together is the only way to ever take it apart without breaking it.
"Drink," Tamsin said when she saw Lark's lips crush themselves thin. Ezra tossed a dipper. The girl caught it one-handed and drank like a soldier, fast and true. "Where's your ma?" Tamsin asked, not soft but not hard either. "Sold," Lark said, and in that one word was a ledger of towns and men and lies. "To Blackburn's man at the camp. She cooks. They said I'd make her stay put." Tamsin felt her jaw lock, and then made herself unlatch it. Locked jaws made locked choices. "We'll fetch her," she said, as if she were promising to bring a pair of boots back from repair. Outside the rails, the lead rider had dismounted and gone back to smiling as if he were in on the joke. "That's a pretty dance, Mr. Rain. Take your bow. Now bring the box and the accounts, and we'll clap twice, then go." "I told you what you could have. You brought a sack. You aimed at children. That changes the math." Garrett shifted on his shelf. He had counted rounds and heat and distance, and decided his mind would work better with coffee. He disappeared from the rim with a scuff that made dust blink. The lead rider noticed and didn't like what his face did when he noticed. "Time," Ezra said under his breath. "Time," Tamsin agreed, and swung up to the box again with Lark quick as a note behind her. Ezra took the off-leader's cheek and murmured something old and kindly in a language no one speaks but horses and mothers. "Gate!" Tamsin called. Ezra kicked it, and it flew aside like a theater curtain. The cautious rider had put his horse in a good spot to block the exit and was telling himself a story about how skill and a straight back would make the world behave. Tamsin gave him one chance. That was really 2. "Move," she said.
He looked at her and saw a small woman with a torn hat and a blood stripe on her shoulder. He also saw the team, square under a hand that asked rather than struck. He moved. They broke from the corrals and arrowed for the north road. The yard erupted as men remounted and fumbled at stirrups and shouted the way men shout when they're afraid of hearing themselves think. Ezra set his rifle on the top rail and sighted not at men but at ground, snapping shots at places where hooves planned to be. The dirt there leapt and argued. Horses chose other conversations. "Town," Tamsin told the team again, and it felt like a song. Town, town, town. Wind flattening her coat, Lark leaned forward and put her chin over the box rail the way children do when they want to be the sharp of a ship. "You're not a mister," she said, as if the thought had finally found the door it wanted. "No, not when I can help it." "Why do they call you Mr. Rain?" "Because it takes less breath to be wrong than to get a job," Tamsin said. "Hold on." The road to town was a long underline under a sentence someone had forgotten to write. Mesquite and saltbush clung to its margins like commas. Ahead, the vague smudge sharpened into buildings. The Trunk and Trestle Mercantile, TRNK and TRSDL. The sign had been shot out by someone who disliked vowels. The eatery with a boiled coffee smell. The smithy where the anvil had its own opinion. The jail that looked like a humorless schoolhouse. Sheriff Hollis stood on the boardwalk with his thumbs under his suspenders and his face arranged into the moral certainty of a man who slept fine unless someone else was making noise. Bidaroo, the schoolteacher who also kept the jail keys because she knew how to keep promises, squinted into the dust. A handful of townsfolk had arranged themselves to appear unconcerned while attempting to see history. Tamsin didn't aim for the jail because men who aim for jails sometimes get put in them. She aimed for the smithy because iron loves iron, and a wheel that might quit deserved a friend. She brought the team around and slotted the right rear into the blacksmith's open bay with a sigh that felt like a throat unclenching. "Help," she said to the world at large, and the world at large, in the person of Harlan the smith, answered with a wrench, a jack, and a grunt that meant he'd seen worse. Hollis stepped down into the street and tipped his hat with 2 fingers. "Morning, Mr. Rain," he said with the kind of dry courtesy men in drought states use instead of rain. "Morning," she said. "Men coming belong to Blackburn. They set an ambush at Dry Harrow, used a child as weight on the scale, and asked me to choose between a bank's favors and a life." Hollis's mouth flattened. "You chose the life." "Seems I did."
Vidaroo had gone to the child without waiting for introductions. "What's your name?" she asked, hands already gentle in the places girls most need them to be gentle. "Lark," the girl said. "My ma cooks at the coal camp. Blackburn's man bought her." Vita's jaw went tight. "Bought isn't a word we use here," she said, and her voice was about as kind as a knife you loan a friend. "We'll fetch her." Hollis looked at Tamsin. "You bring trouble when you bring Blackburn." "I brought the truth he sent ahead of himself," she said. "Your choice what to do with it." He chewed on that long enough to make a decision seem like thrift. "Jail," he said finally. "We'll sort who belongs where and who swore to what." "Make it quick," she said. "He'll have men in the alleys and on roofs. He always does." "Always?" Hollis arched a brow. "You speak like history." "I hear things," she said. "My horses tell me." As if to prove her point, the team shifted and breathed together. Attention turned down street. Sound came ahead of sight. The drum of hooves, the brag of men who needed to remind the morning that their names still had their hats on. Blackburn didn't come with them. He rarely came first. He liked the second wave, the one that walked back through smoke and told the story with him inside it, wearing a better shirt. The lead rider who had smiled too much came in first, dust-caked, hat-canted, eyes glazing with the effort of seeming unconcerned. Garrett was not with him. The cautious rider was, and 2 men who smelled like they'd emptied a whiskey over fear and let both dry. "Town business," Hollis called, standing off center in the street the way buyers do when they want a seller to come to them. "You're welcome to it if you wipe your feet." "Sheriff," the lead rider said cheerfully, "we come to make a correction. Mr. Rain over there got turned by a sob story. We'll be on our way with the bank's property and the accounts." Vidaroo, still with a palm on Lark's shoulder, spoke without raising her voice. "You told a lie to a road sign.
We don't let that pass in a place where roads are the only thing that takes you away." The lead writer twitched as if he'd been slapped by air. "Ma'am, I'm sure—" "Keys," she said to Hollis, and he handed them because sometimes a man knows who is sheriff and who only wears the badge. The cautious rider saw which way the wind would like to blow and put his hands out slowly, fingers spread. "I'm not here to die." "Good," Vida said, "then don't." She walked past him as if he were a chair and opened the jail door. The lead writer laughed softly as if the laughter would soften the town to him. "Now, Sheriff, let's not embarrass anyone. Mr. Blackburn and the bank are on good terms. He's helpful." Hollis didn't blink. Men who call themselves helpful make me count my spoons. Behind the rider, 2 more men appeared, then 3, then a string. The street filled with the raw sound of threat, pretending to be law. A man in a black coat with a paisley vest and a watch chain neat as a scout's braid stepped out of the moving wall and tipped his hat. "Morning, neighbors," he said like a man introducing himself at a potluck. "I'm Reuben March, Mr. Blackburn's agent." March had a court's patience and a riverboat's mouth. He made sentences with handrails on them. He smiled at Tamsin with politeness, at Hollis with familiarity, at Vida with a kind of weary admiration, and at Lark not at all. "You had an unfortunate incident on your line," March went on. "We're here to help with the paperwork. The funds in question are disputed. We'll move them to a neutral ledger. Everyone can breathe easier." "Neutral," Vida said, as if tasting a new medicine. "The word is pretty, the meaning sticks in the teeth." Hollis took 2 steps. "You men can unbuckle and stack iron on the boardwalk, or you can ride out. Those are the neutral options." March folded his hands. "Let's not cultivate martyrdom. We have a better way." He gestured, and a wagon rolled forward, covered, plain. The team harnessed to it were good beasts, their heads hung like they'd been talked past listening. 2 guards rode each side. Between them sat a woman in a gray dress with flour dust on her cuffs and an expression like a door that had been shut a long time. Lark made a sound that might have been a bird hitting a window. "Ma!" Tamsin reached for the girl and missed because Lark was already a streak off the box, legs finding ladder, boots finding dirt, body making the shortest line between love and what was keeping it. March lifted a hand the way a man lifts his hand to display a ring. "A sign of goodwill," he said. "Mrs. Mercy Hale. Blackburn is not unkind. He simply insists on rent, on the right to breathe. We've read the terms." Mercy sat very straight, eyes on the girl, hands in her lap so still you might think they were sleeping. The guard to her left had the kind of pity that kills in his eyes. Lark ran. Tamsin moved too, but she didn't aim to catch, she aimed to cover. She came off the box with more grace than her shoulder deserved and put herself between the 2 guards' lines of sight and the small, fierce package that was a child who didn't care who owned streets. "Hold," Hollis said sharply, and the 2 guards did because they had the look of men who obeyed when someone used voice right. Lark hit the wagon wheel and scrambled up it like she'd been born to grease and iron. Mercy's hands moved for the first time. Out, then around, then into. The child vanished in the circle of them, and the street breathed like a man who'd been underwater. "We all want the same outcome," March said to the air. "Peace, order, predictability." He faced Tamsin. "And safety. You ran my men through 2 corrals and a blacksmith shop. Safe is a word you can't use until you put the bank's property back in the hands that claim it. The bank's property is a lie on a page. That girl is not." March adjusted his cuffs, as if rearranging his body might rearrange the town. "This, then. You keep the child, and we take the box. Everyone smiles for the photograph none of you will ever own." "Or," Vida said, stepping forward until she and March were ribbon close, "we put you and yours in our little jail, wire Judge Del Rio in Carson, and make you argue where the air is thin." You think Del Rio isn't a phone call in Blackburn's vest? March asked pleasantly. Hollis lifted his badge on his chain and let it fall. We think we can make a mess louder than Blackburn wants to clean. It might have become a gun conversation then, the nastiest dialect men have made, but a sound came down the street that turned words into dust. A steady, low, close thunder that wasn't hooves, but iron on iron, timed and certain and hungry. The rail spur. The noon coal run, late by an hour, hammered into its siding behind the freight yard. Steam coughed white into blue. The black engine stood like a bull, hide slick, eyes bright, breath hot. Men in caps jumped from couplers and swore with the good humor of people whose lives are all steel and known consequence. Timetable says the freight goes first, Harlan the smith observed, half to himself, half to the engine like a fable-teller checking his pages. And the timetable is the scripture no man here dares edit. March breathed out, a small, irritated breath as the town's attention slipped from him to the machine that did not care if it was looked at. Attention is coin, and he was used to counting it. Tamsin felt the calculus change. She felt the small hinge in the day swing. The train meant witnesses not bought. It meant a noise loud enough to smother the voices March liked to use. It meant schedule, which trumped ego as cleanly as a river trumps a stick. Sheriff, you want this to be about paper and law, not lead. Put March in the jail for the next 10 minutes while we get Mercy and Lark to the coach. Then we take the spur and fetch the rest of what Blackburn thinks he owns. You mean to take the train? Hollis said, not quite a question. I mean to borrow it, with the engineer's permission, which I'll persuade from him as a woman who has moved weight in the world. Vida smiled, small and sharp. I'll have my children write a thank-you note. She turned to March. Keys, she said again. Put your wrists out.
March considered the air. He set his hat more carefully on his careful hair. Then he extended his wrists, palms up, as if bestowing his hands on an altar. 10 minutes, he said. Then the world comes back to its senses. Perhaps, Vida said, and the cuffs clicked with a music Tamsin liked better than gunshots. They moved in a choreography no one had rehearsed, but everyone seemed to know. Harlan wedged and bound the bracket until the wheel behaved like a gentleman. Hollis walked March through the jail door like a man escorting a guest into a parlor he was about to fumigate. Vida kept herself between Mercy and every angle a bullet could choose. Ezra jogged up the street with a coil of rope and a grin that said he'd always wanted to ride a train without buying a ticket. Mr. Blunt discovered he had legs that could be useful and fetched bandage and coffee with the zeal of a convert. Miss Finch stood in the street with her jaw lifted just so and told anyone who looked at her crooked that they were late for church. Tamsin climbed to the box again. Lark clambered up beside her with a dignity that made her look older than the math said. Rail yard, Tamsin told the team. Slow, straight. They went as if they belonged there, which, after a fashion, they did. The town parted, eyes and hats tugged aside by the weight of intent. At the yard, the engine crew watched them approach with expressions that had been through wars men don't put in ledgers. The engineer, a broad man with burn scars like a map of constellations over one cheek, spat to one side and raised a brow that asked a whole week of questions. Name, Tamsin asked, because names take fear out of air. Bren, he said, voice a gravel baritone. You're the one they call Rain. Tamsin, she said, we need your spur. We need to go to the coal camp and take a woman back from a book that says she's an item. We'll bring your cars back with interest. Interest? He asked, amused despite himself. Dignity, she said, and less Blackburn in your yard. Bren looked past her at the men gathering at the edge of his domain like wolves discovering fences.
He looked at the sheriff, who had a key in one hand and a willingness in the other. He looked at the child, pressed into a woman's side on a wagon seat, and at the woman who had flour on her cuffs and iron in her spine. Couplers are rusted on car 2, and the siding lever's stiff. But she'll move for a lady who asks nice. She will, Tamsin said. She slid from the box and set her shoulder to the lever with Bren. It took the weight of the two of them and the laughter of Ezra climbing the ladder like a boy to make it sing. But it sang. "Line us," Bren told his fireman, and the man with cap and coal-black hands did, easing the engine until the couplers kissed with a clank that sounded like agreement. "Blackburn won't let you," the cautious rider called, from a distance that wasn't brave and wasn't quite cowardly. "Maybe," Bren said, "but the timetable is the timetable." He climbed into his cab. "You ridin'?" Tamsin looked at her team. "Ezra, I'll stable and water 'em, then I'll jog along the track behind you like we're both 25. Bring rope. I was born with it." Lark's hand found Tamsin's sleeve. "I can ride trains. I'm good at not falling." "You're good at not letting go," she said. "That's different. Better. Come." They made a short train of themselves. Engine, 2 flats, 1 boxcar with a side door that didn't believe in closing, and a caboose that had seen better songs. Bren's engine fed the belly until it glowed. Steam spoke groaning vowels as the engine leaned into the couplers like a man who had decided to apologize and knew he could only do it by moving his body. "Sheriff," Tamsin called down to Hollis, "hold march 10 minutes longer than you think you can, then 10 more. If I'm not back by the second 10, send someone who doesn't mind breaking paper." "You're asking me to be lawless," Hollis said, a little wonderingly.
"I'm asking you to be just," Vita said. "Those are brothers, Sheriff. One is older, but not always wiser." Hollis nodded once, like a man learning a new hymn. Bren pulled the whistle. It cried like a hawk that had never been caged. The train shuddered, then rolled. The world narrowed to rail, tie, rock, heat. Men on horseback flanked the yard and then had to fall back because the engine did not argue. It simply was. March watched from the jail window with his hands folded as if in church. He might have prayed for efficiency. The spur ran north and west to the coal camp between 2 low ridges that cradled more soot than wind. It cut through a slot of land where water had chewed, and across a trestle that had been built by men who liked to hear hammers ring. It traveled, as all rails do, the shortest compromise through a country that did not believe in straight lines. On the flat car, Tamsin stood with Lark and Vita, wind flattening clothes, grit making a paste at the corners of eyes. Bren handled the throttle with the lover's hand. He was not fast, but he was inevitable. "You ever shot a rifle off a moving car?" Vita asked conversationally, checking the sling on a piece of iron that had belonged to an uncle who believed women should teach only letters until Vita corrected him with the other alphabet. "No," Tamsin said. "I've shot a thought. It kicks less." "Good," Vita said. "Save the bullets for thick places." The trestle approached. Under it the gulch frothed dry. On it the planks rattled out their catechism. Live, live, live. Halfway across, a rider appeared on the ridge to their left, a man with a carbine and the posture of a store clerk who had been given a weapon with his receipt. He took aim, then decided the distance meant he should aim longer, then decided that aiming longer made him look more like a man and less like a clerk. He did not fire. Bren did not look. "Blackburn's got watchers. He's got lists." "Let him add my name," Tamsin said. Her mouth was dry and tasted like old pennies. She swallowed grit and called it bread. The camp announced itself first by smell, coal and boiled beef and men who didn't know how to miss a drink. Then by sound, shouts, a hammer,
a harmonica grinding through the only tune the man knew. Then by sight, shacks lined in army formation, a big cookhouse with a roof that had more patches than roof, a yard where men in caps leaned on shovels the way penitents lean on pews. Bryn eased the engine to a sigh and then to a step. He stopped with the nose just past the cookhouse door. The heat from the boiler pulled the air tight. A man in a white apron stepped out with a ladle like a scepter. His hair was slicked with lard. His smile was a knife wrapped in rag. "Afternoon," he said. "You're out of your lane." "Mercy Hale, we've come to escort her to town." "She don't belong to town," the cook said. "She belongs to the job. Mr. Blackburn holds paper says so." "Paper says a lot," Vida said, stepping off the flat car with the kind of poise you could set a diamond on. "Most of it lies about what matters." The cook weighed the number of backs behind Tamsin and the number behind himself and found the difference worrisome. He lifted the ladle as if it might argue on his behalf. "We got rules, and we got train," Bryn observed mildly from the cab. "Which of those you want to sleep under?" Men in caps drifted closer, empty bowls in hand, men who ate first and fought later. One of them had eyes that moved like a fox's. Another had hands that had done a different kind of work once, delicate and ruinous. None of them made themselves a line Blackburn could use, not yet. Mercy and Lark stood side by side on the flat car now, and if the sight of them didn't make the world remember itself, then the world needed a different mirror. The cook seemed to realize what the men around him were thinking and adjusted his smile to show more teeth. "Contract," he said finally, fishing in a pocket and pulling out a paper that had been folded enough times to forget where it started. "Ink don't care who reads it." Vida read it without moving her lips. She had learned early that lips gave away power. Signed by a foreman who no longer breathes within this jurisdiction. Witnessed by a man who spells his name different every time he writes it. Consideration specified as continuance of protection. She folded the paper into a quadrant as neat as a parson's hand. "Protection from what?" the cook said. "From being hungry?"
"Then feed her," Vida said, and ripped the paper clean down its spine. The cook's smile died of natural causes. He looked to the men in caps for his permission to be furious and found none of it forthcoming. He looked to the rail spur and discovered that iron looks back at you with no interest in your face. "You can tell Blackburn," Vida said, "that a woman is not a ledger item he can transfer between books. Tell him he is welcome to sue us in Del Rio's court. Tell him he will lose a little more hair every time he thinks about the day he tried to price Mercy Hale's breath. Tell him I said to come himself next time. Tell him to pack a lunch." They moved quickly then, because speed after speech is the only proof you meant the words. Mercy and Lark climbed down to the cinder crunch of the yard, hands still touching as if the world would crack if their palms broke company. Bran backed the engine a car length and took them aboard, Vida shooing them like hens onto the flat. The cook stood with his ladle and a whole history of orders curdling in his gut. Someone, fox-eyed, started a clap. It wasn't loud. It wasn't brave. It was enough. 2 more men clapped. A third took off his cap and scratched his head and then held the cap in his hands as if it felt like a baby to him all of a sudden. "Back," Breton said, "before the part of this story I don't like shows up." They rolled, a little faster than the timetable liked. The trestle thrummed again. The ridge watchers had multiplied to 3. One fired because it felt insane not to when a train was stealing a line of your employer's math. The round dinged a rail and went off to find a gopher with bad luck. At town, the yard had a different temperature. The air had that prickle to it that comes when a voice has been kept quiet too long and is anxious to make up the difference. Hollis stood with his thumbs under his suspenders again, but now the stance looked like a man poising for a photograph he hoped to hand to his sons. Vida's keys hung at her belt, and March stood in the jail doorway without cuffs, which was a choice Hollis had made because he believed in drama as a weapon. Blackburn himself had come. He was not tall. He did not need to be. He had the kind of compactness men get when they've shortened themselves to fit the cabin of their own appetite. His hair had retreated with discipline, leaving a forehead that could host a sermon. He wore a gray suit that would have read as city anywhere but a real city. His mouth held a scar in its right corner that made it look like it was always deciding between a laugh and a bite. He tipped his hat a fraction. "Mr. Rain," he said, voice low and confident of being heard. "Or should I say, Miss?" "Tamsin is fine," she said, and the sound of her name in his mouth turned something inside her to sand. "You have inconvenienced my day in ways that cannot be compensated with coin." "The worst kind of inconvenience," Vida said, "the kind with a conscience." He didn't look at her. Men like him rarely look at the women who make the road under their feet. He looked at Mercy, then at Lark, then back to Tamsin. He had the courtesy to admire courage in his enemies. It made him a worse enemy. "You took my cook," you said. "You took my ledger's page. You interfered with the natural movement of property under contract." "You used a child as a rope," Tamsin said, and felt the town inhale. "You rode a detour in a country with no rain." He smiled then, small. "Stories," he said. "We are telling them." He turned to Hollis. "Sheriff, I'd like my property back." Hollis did not reach for his badge because it already lived where it needed to. He said, "We'll see what the judge says," almost politely. "Judge Del Rio takes my calls." "And he takes mine," Vida said. "He plays both sides of his chessboard. In between, men like you forget that judges die and towns bury them or don't." Blackburn considered her as a man might consider a crack in a glass. Then he dismissed the thought and returned his eyes to Tamsin. "You've got a fast hand," he said. "You've got a mind like a gear. I could use both where they'd be better paid. I'm paid already. In miles. In the sound a team makes when it trusts me."
He tilted his head. "Trust is a currency. It inflates." "You're wrong," she said gently. "It grows interest." "That's a banker's pun," he said. "I'll allow it once." He lifted a finger, and the men who had come with him moved like parts of a thing that was not quite alive and not quite machine. "I'll take that box now, and the papers." "No," Tamsin said. He sighed, and it was genuine, which made it worse. "Then I'll take something else." He looked not at the stage, not at the train, not at the bank, but at the street between the jail and the smithy, at the place where town narrowed to a throat. "You've made a good story out of yourself today," he said to her. "You've gathered attention. I'll split it. I'll take it in 2 handfuls and make every man here choose which handful he can afford to watch." He raised his hand, and under the boardwalk at the trunk and trestle, a bundle of sticks that had not been there an hour ago noticed it had a job. Fire found them. Flame licked wood with delicate interest. Smoke stood up. At the same instant, on the other side of the street, just behind Harlan's smithy, a work shed coughed black cloud and belched a different orange. Men shouted because men shout at fire like it can hear and obey. The town pivoted like a flock. Half ran left, half ran right. The street became a mouth. Blackburn's men moved into the middle like a coin on a table where the cups are already in motion. "Waterline!" Harlan bellowed. "Bucket circle! Vida!" "I know!" she said, and she did, pulling women and children into a chain that reached faster than panic and handed liquid along like a litany. Hollis looked at Tamsin, and for once in his life his thumbs weren't under his suspenders because they were on his gun. "I can't be 2 places." "You can be in the one you're needed," she said. "I'll be the other." He didn't argue. "March," he snapped, and the agent turned and smiled at him as if they'd just agreed to share a pie. "I step on your throat." "Understood," March said pleasantly. "We all have roles." The street became 3 stories, the fire to the left, the fire to the right, and the quiet strip of dirt between them, where Blackburn walked with his hands behind his back, admiring the efficiency of combustion. He admired efficiency the way other men admired sunsets. "Your move," he told Tamsin, and the way he said it told her he had more moves stacked like cards up his sleeve. She moved without speaking. Talking had had its say. She slid onto the coach box, grabbed the reins, and whistled once, high. The team lunged as if they had been lit. She drove them straight down the throat of the street, skirts of fire on either side, heat like a hand. Lark was on the flat car still, small fists balled, eyes bigger than the world. Mercy had a bucket in each hand and a line of women behind her. Ezra ran like a boy with rope over his shoulder, grin gone now, face carved thin with the joy of doing the thing that counts when counting stops mattering. Bren leaned on the whistle and the world screamed for her. The engine strained, wheels biting, steam white and righteous. Blackburn looked up at it and for the first time put his hand out like a man who had something important to say and needed quiet to say it. "Now," Tamsin said. But the word wasn't to anyone in particular. It was to the shape of the day. She cut the team hard right and slotted the coach's wounded wheel between 2 posts only a woman who had measured everything could have trusted. She left the box in a roll that seemed to break the air and hit the flat car rungs with her palms like applause. "Rope," she said to Ezra, who arrived as if he had been born out of the word. She looped through, caught a hitch on the coach's rear boot, ran the free end around a cleat on the flat, and met Bren's eyes. "Drag," she said, and the engine did, dragging the coach sideways like a calf out of mud, the wounded wheel screaming protest and then deciding protest was useless. Blackburn's ranks stuttered. The cautious rider flinched aside, saving himself from being made into a hinge. 2 of Blackburn's men raised guns and then lowered them, confused by the physics of it all.
"Up," Tamsin cried to Lark. "Get up!" The girl scrambled onto the coach roof and lay flat, hands and knees like magnet and iron. Tamsin climbed beside her in a movement that would make her shoulder burn dreams into her sleep in a week if she got a week to sleep. They crossed the street 9 feet above the middle of it, sliding on rope and luck. The coach hung like a ridiculous ornament on the side of a train. Below, Blackburn watched with that slight smile back on his mouth, as if someone had told a joke whose punchline he had written. He lifted his hand again, patient as a clock. From the alley beside the bank, from a doorway where a drunk had slept since last July, from a window that faced the livery, new men stepped, quieter, with longer coats. They didn't look at the fire, they looked at the rope. "Cut it," Blackburn said. A knife flashed, the rope went slack. The coach dropped 3 feet and slammed into the side of the flat car, wood cracking like a rifle shot. Lark cried out. Tamsin grabbed her and swallowed her own cry because it would cost air she needed to think. Bren threw the throttle open to keep forward the only truth that mattered. The engine screamed, the flats lurched, the coach bounced. The team loosed, bolted, then remembered Tamsin's voice in their bones and veered to the rail yard where a boy with hands too big for his wrists caught their heads like it was the only thing he'd ever been meant to do. Hollis fired, not at men, at ground, at air, where a thought might become a decision. Men ducked thoughts, as if they were bullets, because in a way they were. Vita's bucket line hit its rhythm, water flying, women chanting a thing like a psalm, men learning how to borrow their strength from them without shame. Harlan and Mr. Blunt stood shoulder to shoulder, throwing water like they were confessing together. The coach skidded onto the far side of the street, wheels hitting dirt, axle finally catching itself like a drunk at a windowsill. Tamsin rolled, pulled Lark with her, and the 2 of them slammed into the caboose ladder. Pain found Tamsin's ribs and wrote its name there with a pen dipped in salt. She looked up through smoke and steam. Blackburn stood 30 feet away, hands still behind his back, watching the rope fibers drift down like feathers in a ruined parlor. His smile had widened the width of that scar. Behind him, a man stepped out with a rifle older than all of this and steadier than most men. Garrett, the shelf man, had come down off his shelf. He set his bead on Tamsin. He had warmth in his eyes and regret and something that might have been respect, and none of that would change the math he did with his finger. "Tamsin," Vita shouted from across a seam of flame. "Down!" She did not go down. She brought herself to full height atop the caboose ladder, because high is where she could see, and she had decided she would see all of this and remember it so that the telling later would be true. Lark was a knot behind her knee, breath hot on her calf. Garrett drew the breath that meant the shot would live. Blackburn said, so softly only Tamsin and Garrett heard it, "Wait." Garrett waited because whatever else he was the kind of man who heard the boss between the gun and the echo. "Mr. Rain," Blackburn said, voice carrying now like a man on a stage, "you are not what I expected when I was told I'd meet the West's fastest hands. You are more dangerous. You are a story that people like better than me." He nodded at Garrett. "Put down the legend." Garrett's cheek touched his stock. His eye became a tunnel that had only one end, and it was Tamsin Rain's chest. And then a sound ripped through everything that made sound, the shriek of the engine's safety valve blowing wide. Steam exploded in a white curtain between the flats and the street with a force that threw hats and men and plans sideways. In that phantom fog, the world was erased and then redrawn with a worse pencil. Tamsin felt heat and wet and the steady of iron at her back. She put her palm on Lark's head and pressed her down. She just saw a shape in the fog step up on the flat car from the street with a grace that looked like someone who had lived 10 lives and shaken hands with each of them. He held a pistol in his left hand, low and loose. He was taller than Blackburn, not as broad as Bren, and he moved like a line of poetry. "Tamsin," he said, and his voice reached her in the whiteout like a thread. She knew that voice. She knew it like she knew the taste of rain on a dust road and the smell of horses after a run. The voice belonged to a past she had folded into a small square and hidden beneath the seat where the spare Colt slept. "Ezra?" she said, and then realized it wasn't Ezra. Ezra's laughter lived elsewhere. This man's laughter had been a different thing in a different year. The steam thinned, the shape sharpened, the man's hat brim appeared like a sunrise. His eyes were neither kind nor cruel. They were the eyes of someone who weighed things in his palm and put down what did not feel right. "Call me what you used to, before you spelled your name with one letter." Garrett's bead came through the steam again, sure as sunrise. Blackburn lifted his hand, palm flat. The man on the flat stepped between the bead and Tamsin, not quick, not slow, exactly when the world wasn't looking, and raised his left-hand pistol in a movement that looked like he was introducing two strangers who would hate each other, and
Garrett's fired first. Garrett's rifle cracked in the same breath, 2 notes of one grim chord, and the bullets braided past each other like angry hornets. One shaved the caboose iron an inch from Tamsin's ear. The other knocked Garrett's hat into the smoke and burned a part out of his sleeve. The white sheet of steam tore in the middle, and the day broke open again. Tamsin did not think. She did not allow her body to be the slow student of fear. She dropped sideways along the ladder, dragged Lark with her until the girl's shoes scraped iron, and felt the passing hot breath of a ricochet comb her hair. The man on the flat, this apparition from the years she did not say out loud, moved with a left-hander's economy, cocked once, and sent one clean round into the dirt at Blackburn's heel. Warning, not wound. Statement, not sentence. Blackburn did not flinch. His hands remained behind his back like he had no use for them in a world of hired grip. "Quill," Tamsin said, and the name fell out of her like an old coin that had stayed warm in a pocket. He turned his head a fraction, and she saw the scar along his jaw she remembered as a red seam, now white. "Hello, Tass." It hit her then. The old campfire near Fort Gadsden, his aim with a bottle tossed high, the way his laughter used to sit low in his chest until the night the cards went wrong and the man across from him died too quick and too quiet. Tobias Quill. She had left him behind on a road that pointed toward a hanging tree. He had not hung. He had become a man who stepped between a bead and a beating heart with his own skin. "Step aside," Garrett said to Quill, voice even, bead steady again. Boss said put her down. Quill did a thing Tamsin had never seen him do. He smiled with his eyes and not with his mouth. "The boss can wait half a breath longer," he said, and the way he said boss made a man-sized word into a boy's hat. "Don't," Tamsin told Quill, the word a thread between them. "I don't need saving." "You never did. But it's bad manners to watch a friend get written out of a story by a man who bought the ink." Blackburn at last moved his hands from behind his back. He lifted them to chest height, palms out, as if he were about to praise a choir. "Let's simplify," he said, and his voice was the clear edge of glass. "The bank's papers, the box, and the woman. Leave the child if you like your legends tender. Or," he nodded toward the fires that licked both sides of the street, "or watch your town salt itself for my pasture." Hollis, smoke-streaked and breathing hard, strode into the street with his badge-catching firelight, not shame. "You'll get neither box nor woman, and if you light another match in my town, I'll make sure the only paper your name sees is a notice tacked to a post." "You going to pin justice to me with that tin star?" Blackburn asked, almost kindly. Vida's bucket hand flew out and came back with a pistol Tamsin hadn't known she wore. She held it like an instruction she could grade. "I'll sew it through." Gun muzzles shifted toward her. Ezra, somewhere to Tamsin's right, said Gabriel's quiet name as if to invite angels. "Enough," Tamsin said, and the word was not loud, but it had weight. It carried the cider tang of steam, and the black swallow of smoke, and the iron lung of the engine, and the old low thunder of a team waiting for her hands. The world obeyed for a breath. "Tobias," she said without taking her eyes off Blackburn, "your quarrel with bullets was always with men who loved them. This one does not. You fire at him, and you do his favorite thing for him." Quill breathed out. Always did hate making a rich man comfortable. He lowered the pistol a hair, not enough to make it harmless, enough to make Blackburn notice that comfort was a coin he had to chase. "Garrett," she called, and the shelf man flicked a blink in answer, surprised to find his name in her mouth. "Your arithmetic is too clean to be in this ledger. You hit iron on purpose and bracket when a chest was there. You can miss again." His mouth twitched. "I don't miss. I choose." "Then choose." "I did," and he took his bead off her heart and put it on the rope-last balance pole that held the hanging bell over the trunken trestle's awning. His shot cut the rope. The bell dropped one hard foot and resumed its life as a bell instead of an ornament, clanging the alarm with a fury to shame men and wake cows. The bucket line cheered, and 3 boys with bad hair and good legs ran to join it because a bell had told them what kind of day it was. Blackburn's gaze ticked to Garrett. Something cold traveled through the air between them. Later, the men in town would call it a draft. Tamsin called it a reckoning and put a pin in it. She climbed to the flat car top, slow enough to be read by every muzzle. "You built this to be a story," she told Blackburn. "I won't read it with your voice."
"The story has one ending," Blackburn said. "You trade your life for something you want. We all do it. Some of us keep score better." "I don't write lives in chalk," she said. "The first rain makes liars of bookkeepers." He tilted his head. "You love these people? This street? A driver loves none of it. A driver loves ahead. You love the next mile and the one after. That's your trick." Raised heat flushed her cheeks and then left as quickly as it had come. He wasn't wrong.
She loved the way a road could be convinced to deliver you. She loved the moment before a bend when you chose the line. She loved the breath a team took when they believed you. "But I learned a new trick," she said. "I learned to love the stop." She looked at Lark pressed against the caboose ladder, eyes ferocious, and at Mercy across the way, face soot-striped, jaw set to the town's rhythm. "I learned to love what stands." Blackburn's smile dented. "Last chance?" he said, and there was no theater left in it, only appetite. "Give me the box and the papers and the woman, or I will take the child and the line, and the town will give me my due anyway from the insurance and the bank's relief. I will be paid for whatever happens here." "Not today," Tamsin said, and felt the desert's old quiet tuck itself under her tongue like a psalm. She moved. It was not quick in the way legends like. It was exact in the way they always forget to tell. She stepped to the coupling between the flat and the caboose and kicked free the safety pin Ezra had warned her never to trust. The slack banged, the coupler mouths yawned a finger's width, and Bren, understanding before any other mind could finish a thought, eased the engine a hair forward. The gap widened with a metallic groan that sounded like truth learning to speak. "Quill," she said. He fired into the dirt between Blackburn's shoes again, and for the first time the man took a half step. Movement begat movement. Hollis came from the right, Vida from the left. Ezra vaulted the handrail of the flat car and landed like a cat that had decided to be a man for a while. "Cut," Tamsin said, and Ezra's rope knife was in his hand. He slashed the last strand that held the coach to the flat. The coach dropped to its own wheels and skated 2 feet before deciding gravity could be friends. "Bren, take us," she called. The engine shoved back, not shrieking now but grunting. The flats rolled, the caboose lagged and then followed. In the street, Blackburn's men suddenly found geometry hard. The moving edge of the flat created a new line that their old plan had not accounted for. Hollis stepped into the absence that their confusion made and took 2 guns without having to be a hero. Vida did the same with a composure that made 2 more men fail to be legends in their own minds. Garrett did what good arithmetic does. He moved to cover the worst variable. He pivoted, placed his bead on the hand holding the knife near the rope that someone else was raising to cut the brake line on the coach, and put a slug through the rope clean as a seam ripper through rotten cloth. The brake line held. The would-be cutter screamed and ran into a water bucket. Blackburn watched it all like a man at an auction whose item is being bid up by people he hadn't expected to have money. Something in his face loosened that had not loosened since he was a boy with a good coat and an empty father. "Tobias," he said mildly, without turning his head. "Change teams." Quill laughed once, low. "He did," he said, and his pistol came up not quite to Blackburn's chest, enough to move air. The cautious rider, whose name Tamsin did not know and would always remember, found himself kneeling with his hands on his head and a look of surprise at how easy it had been to pick the right side when somebody finally said out loud which side was which. He scrolled toward Hollis and surrendered in a way that looked like learning. The flat car's corner kissed Blackburn's rank and it warped. Bren's whistle let out a small satisfied bark like a dog that had learned a new game. Ezra leapt to the coach boot, took the rail, and swung himself to the box in a single muscle sentence. He grabbed the lines with a reverence that would have made a preacher jealous. "Team's yours," Tamsin told him. "Town's mine." He grinned without teeth. "Break their hearts." She jumped from the flat to the street, shoulder screaming that it had not signed for this duty, and landed in a crouch that made the dirt want to be a rug. Blackburn turned toward her finally, fully, like a man who has decided he would like to meet the wind that keeps putting dust in his mouth. "You are very good," he said softly. "Good past the point where it pays." "You're very sure," she said just as soft, "sure past the point where you can learn." He shrugged with a small courageousness she would not admire later, but could not help seeing now. "I learned how this works. Men want ease. I sell it. They'll forgive anything they pay for monthly." "Not this," she said, and moved in. "Sheriff," she said without looking up, "the arrest is yours."
Hollis came as if he'd been standing beside her and thought for 10 minutes waiting for the line. He snapped irons on Blackburn's wrists with a click that sounded like winter settling a house. Vida stood over them like a shade in a story that hasn't yet chosen to be a ghost. Men ran and were taken. A few fought and were corrected. The fires, deprived of the story they had been fed, sulked and let themselves be conquered by water and yelling. Bren leaned out of his cab and whooped once, short and obscene and proud. Garrett lowered his rifle and looked out over the town as if measuring new shares of light. "Done?" Quill asked Tamsin, his voice neutral as a ledger line. "Not yet," she said. "He's got more strings." He nodded once. He does. They found 2 under the boardwalk, 1 in the clerk's kisser pocket at the bank, 3 in the alley behind the eatery, and 1 rolled into a cigar in March's inner coat. The boardwalk strings went to a pair of charcoal bundles of brush that wanted to be memory. The bank string tugged a safe deposit key numbered 17. The alley strings tied to nothing with foolishness and the confidence of men who had been told they were invisible. March's cigar string, it was soft twine actually, untied to reveal a paper egg. Vida took the egg like a hen who deserved it more. She cracked the paper with her thumb and rolled out 3 slips, a list of names, a column of figures, and a letter addressed in March's tidy hand to R. Blackburn, proprietor. She read them without moving her lips and let a smile escape that had more corners than kindness. She said, "Receipts. For men purchased under the title of contract, to be worked at the camp until their debt to the company store outlives them. Names here we can bring into the street and stand in daylight. You'll get to argue ownership of their breath now, Mr. March." March folded his hands and looked as if he'd mislaid a hat and would rather discuss anything else. "I have faith in the courts." "Have faith in chairs," Vida said. "You'll be sitting in one for long hours while I read this aloud." Blackburn, on his knees, finally looked like a man who wanted something that could be forgiven. He looked up at Tamsin. "You think the world shifts because you pulled a rope and a woman ripped a paper? I am the world you live in. You condemn me. You cannot move me." She offered him something no one had given him since he was a boy, the clean regard of a person who knows the name of his ghost and is not afraid of it. She said, "You are a bookkeeping error. We balanced you." Bren's fireman shouted from the engine, "Pressure's wrong, we're hot," because machines do not care for epilogues. The safety valve jetted again, not as dramatically as before, but enough to remind men who love their own voices that whistles are older and keener. "Get him in," Hollis said, "and March as well. And 2 of his worst of his men and the cautious rider who came willingly because he wanted to be a witness more than a defendant." They were marched, not an accident of language, toward the jail with the door learned a new rhythm with the passing of wrists and the tread of boots. The bucket line thinned and ended. Water meandered in the street like a tired snake. Smoke descended in strands and lost interest in earth. Lark, with soot on her forehead in the shape of a thumbprint that had never touched her, came to Tamsin and did not let go of her coat. Mercy stood behind her with her hand on the girl's shoulder where it should be. And Vida nodded once as if a math problem had finally found its sum. Quill holstered his pistol, Garrett put his rifle over his shoulder and stepped down off whatever shelf his life had been built on. "What now?" Ezra asked, bounds of rope over one shoulder, hat tilted wicked. "Now we make it stick. Paper and witnesses and wire to Carson. Now we write slow so no one can say their eyes skipped a line." She felt the ache in her shoulder arrive fully now that the day had given her permission to have a body again. She wobbled, Ezra moved as if a string tied them and steadied her elbow. The touch was not needed and very necessary. Hollis came back from the jail with a face that looked like a wheel after a long haul. "Del Rio," he said to Vida. "Wire?" "Wire and a copy to Reno, and a copy to the newspaper in Carson that prints letters from widows." Hollis nodded. "You're mean in the right directions. I'm a schoolteacher,
Vida said. "We grade everything." Blackburn's men were being disarmed and sorted into little groups the way beans are sorted when you don't want to bite a stone. The cautious rider took a deputy's handshake and a promise to testify and looked like he'd been given a second coat. Garrett walked up to Tamsin and took his hat from where it had blown and become an idea. He turned it in his hands as if hats might be studied for answers. "You were right," he said simply. "Arithmetic didn't belong in that ledger."
She eyed him. "You could go," she said. "No irons, no rope. Smoke out of town with the men who love to forget." "I could," he agreed. "I won't." He looked toward the jail. "I'll say what the numbers make of Mr. Blackburn's ledger, and who wrote which digits. No man should be owned by a column." "Why?" she asked, not hard. He touched the hole in his sleeve. "Because I chose wrong for a long time on purpose. Today I chose wrong on accident, and it felt better. That seems a thing to notice." Quill stood with his hands in his pockets as if he were killing time and not rewriting a chapter of himself. "You always did make men want to be tidy, Tams," he said. She met his eyes. There were years between them, and they behaved, for a second, like dogs that might not bite after all. "You always did show up at the part where the road splits," she said. "Better late," he said. She wanted to ask him why he hadn't hung, and where he'd gone, and whose hand had steadied his spare left-handed draw when whiskey tried to curl it. She didn't. The day didn't have room for old questions. It had room for one clear one. "You stayin'?" she asked. He looked at the train and the horses and the thin blue scratch of mountains that always suggest escape to men who need it. "I'll ride to Carson with Hollis," he said. "I've got a thing to say in a room where it will make a dent. After that, maybe I'll drive a day for Hammer and Son and see if my hands remember humility." "They remember," she said. Town settled itself as towns do, by sweeping and cussing and telling. Mr. Blunt hauled buckets and listened to his own breath and decided to live differently for a week, which was longer than he thought. Miss Finch wiped the soot from Lark's face with water that had cooled in the shade, and then put her gloves in her pocket and did not put them back on. Harlan the smith banged the wounded bracket true and made it stronger than it had been before, because men who love iron believe in redemption most where iron bends. Vida wrote names in a little book with a pencil she had cut to a point worthy of testimony. Mercy sat on the coach step with Lark's head in her lap and combed her fingers through the girl's hair until both of them believed in day again. Ezra adjusted the team's harness with a fussiness that made the horses preen. Bren wiped his brow and told his engine it had become poetry. By late afternoon, the street was a map of new lines, ropes drying, ashes damp and sulking, shadows of men who had learned something stretching longer than they had in the morning. Hollis came and went between jail and telegraph like a courier for a government that might finally be invited to this place. March sat on a chair under the jailhouse window, cuffed to its leg, and hummed something tuneless that he thought made him appear unruffled. It didn't. Tamsin walked the length of the coach, fingertips grazing its paint where smoke had kissed it. She felt her shoulder draw and open with each step. She counted the places where the day had put his hands on her. The ladder rung, the bracket blow, the place where the rope went slack and her stomach had hung a second. She breathed and put a name to each one. Breath and name made the weight sit right. "Driver?" Lark's voice came small and sure. "Tamsin," she said. "And yes?" "Can we ride with you to the next place my ma will be ours?" Tamsin looked to Mercy and found her the woman's eyes. Mercy nodded once. The nod said, "I will not owe anyone but myself." It also said, "The road is not the worst idea whoever made me had." "You can," Tamsin said.
We'll put you on the box so you can learn which sounds mean what." Lark smiled in a way that would crack a miser. "The shelf man, Garrett, said the good ones don't need a hill to stand on. Do I have to learn that?" "You already know it," Tamsin said. "You held to iron instead of air." A little wind came down the street then, shifting ash, making the flag over the jail climb halfway up its pole as if hope had told it a joke.
Blackburn, silent behind bars now, watched them through the small window with a gaze that had lost its leverage, but not its hunger. "You've made a dangerous habit," he said when Hollis passed with a dipper of water, "letting one driver stand for a town." Hollis drank and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I didn't let her," he said. "I learned to stand next to her." Night came thin and then wove thick, as it does when a town has told itself a story it wants to keep under its tongue. Lamps winked alive. The train breathed lower, then lower still, and slept with the kind of vigilance machines have when they know morning is a bully. Tamsin did not sleep. She sat on the coach box with her bad shoulder tucked against the doorpost and watched stars arrange themselves into the same shapes they always made when men tried to name them. Ezra brought coffee that had learned humility at last and leaned against the wheel. "You could go," he said, "not as a push, but as a kindness. You could turn the horses east until the sun coughed behind you, and you wouldn't hear this town's name again unless a stranger told it wrong." "I could," she said. "I won't." He nodded. That was always the thing I liked and feared most. You deciding. "Stay," she said. "I will," he said. Garrett came out of the dark as if he had been poured from it and stood on the far side of the street with his hat in his hand like a boy about to speak to a grave. He didn't cross. He didn't need to. Tamsin lifted her cup in a small salute that wasn't forgiveness and wasn't not. He tipped his hat and vanished back into his math. Quill walked up to the box step without asking and set his boot on it. He did not climb. "You'll need a left-hand man on the road to Carson, a witness without pretty words." "I will," she said. "And when we come back?" He looked at the team. They flicked their ears at a nightfly and settled again. "I'll see if I can stand still without going bad," he said. "What name?" she asked, because men deserve that chance. He took off his hat and held it at his side. "Tobias," he said. "We'll let Quill be a story that ends." Dawn found them like it always did, with work to do and mouths to fill and a road to mark. Bren stoked the engine, Ezra checked girths and buckles and told the right-wheeler he was handsomer than the left, which was a lie the right-wheeler needed. Lark came with her hair braided like a plan and climbed to the box without being told. Mercy tucked food into a sack with a look that said sharing was not charity, but arithmetic. Vida brought paper wrapped in twine. Copies of the names, the figures, a sworn statement written in her precise schoolroom hand. Hollis brought deputies and the cautious rider wearing a borrowed badge and the look of a man who had been rescued from himself. March brought himself to the door of the jail and tried a smile that found no customers. Blackburn brought silence. "Ready," Bren called from the cab, and the whistle answered with a cry that made the town's dogs sing and the town's babies sit up and listen as if the story had started over. Tamsin took the lines and breathed the way the road wanted. She looked down at Lark. "Count the hoofbeats for me, out loud, until you learn how to count them without your mouth." Lark did, and the numbers made a song the morning could not interrupt. They rolled toward the spur and the trestle and the thin blue scratch of mountains. Quill rode to the left, left hand loose, eyes busy. Ezra rode to the right with rope draped easy. Vida and Hollis and Bren and the town shrank behind them, and then did not shrink anymore because distance cannot reduce a choice. At the crest before the spur dipped between ridges, Tamsin pulled the team to a stop. The sun laid gold on the rails like varnish. Wind drew a clean line through her hair where a bullet had combed informal the day before. She turned in the box and looked back at Whisper Valley. Not much on a map, everything where it stood, and let herself have the thing a driver seldom allows, a full look over her shoulder. "Faster than me," Ezra said quietly, reading a memory she hadn't written on her face but he could see anyway. "No," she said, "just fast enough." They started down the grade together, a little train and a coach and a braid of riders, and the road, as it always does when a person has earned it, lifted to meet them. By the time the sun found the top of the sky, they were 10 miles toward Carson, and there were 3 new promises in the world. A judge would hear names that had once been numbers. A woman and her child would not be an item on a ledger. And a driver who had taught herself to be a letter would sign with her whole name and not apologize. Tamsin breathed. The horses answered. The engine spoke in a language made of pressure and patience. The track sang. The day did not ask her to be more than she was. She did not ask it to be less than it looked. "We'll be back," Lark said, with the certainty of the saved. "We will," Tamsin said. "And when we are, there'll be a story to tell." She glanced toward the open sky as if it were a box that could hold an end without breaking. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.